Everybody, thank you for attending this late afternoon session. We certainly appreciate your attention. My name is Brandon Lewis. I'm the editor-in-chief of Embedded Computing Design. We cover a myriad of design engineering topics for the electronics engineering community. If you're interested in finding out more, you can check us out at embedded-computing.com. Anyway, that's not why we're here today. We're here today to discuss the RISC-V security ecosystem and the fact that it is now open for business. The premise of this session today has to deal with the fact that while RISC-V was developed out of academia, it is really based on an open architecture. There are other considerations that everybody who's involved with RISC-V needs to take into account if we're going to actually move these solutions into commercial adoption and success. So that's the general premise from a 50,000-foot view, and I'm joined by a few distinguished panelists with me here today. The first of these is Dr. Chunhua Chang, who is a Senior Director of the R&D and Architecture Division at Andes Technology. Chunhua has a PhD in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from the University of Michigan and has worked in the processor design arena for more than 20 years. Before Andes, Dr. Chang worked on a digital signal processor design project in the SoC Technology Center of ITRI in Taiwan. He also worked in Intel's Massachusetts Microprocessor Design Center as a microarchitecture lead for 64-bit superscalar out-of-order processors. Before that, he worked for Digital Equipment Corporation designing Alpha 21264 and Alpha 21464 processors. The second panelist today is down at the very end. His name is CESARE GARLATI, who is the co-founder of RISC-V Security, as well as an internationally renowned expert in information security. He's a former vice president of mobile security at Trend Micro. CESARE currently serves as chief strategist at the Purple Foundation, a technology nonprofit dedicated to enabling security of embedded systems. CESARE is a longtime supporter of the RISC-V Foundation, an active member of the RISC-V Security Group, and co-founder of RISC-V Security, as I mentioned earlier. RISC-V is the creator of the first trusted execution environment for RISC-V. CESARE holds a Berkeley MBA, a master's in electrical engineering, computer science, professional certifications from Microsoft, Cisco, and Oracle, and is a fellow of the Cloud Security Alliance, where he founded and chaired the mobile security and IoT security groups. Third panelist today is Martin Scott, who is third down for me. He's the Senior Vice President and General Manager for Rambus Cryptography. Martin joined Rambus in 2007, leading new business efforts. He now leads the company's platform development efforts and is responsible for Rambus's long-range research and development. The final panelist today is Jyoti Rosenberg, CEO and founder of Dover Microsystems. Jyoti is an experienced executive and innovative entrepreneur experienced in early-stage ventures as well as large companies. Jyoti brings expertise in internet security, web services, and cloud computing to his current role at Dover. He's also authored 3 technical books, Securing Web Services, The Cloud at Your Service, and Who Says I Can't, and is a board member of 2 socially involved nonprofits. Alrighty, so now that the mouthful of that is out of the way, we can get going. And where we really wanted to start off today was talking about moving from academia into the commercial world. So just starting off, CESARE, in your experience, do academic solutions tend to fall short when they're entering the commercial realm? And if so, where and why?
Yes, absolutely. But that's the nature of things, right? So we all been in school, we all done projects, and we know what it takes to make a successful research project. It has to be innovative, cool, a little bit controversial, explore new things. Then you get into the industry and you do boring things that people would pay for. And I guess that's the big difference where we are today, right? So you need creative minds in schools doing skunk works and coming up with very interesting and cool ideas, but you don't really do business with that. What you need is the stability, and we'll go into the details eventually, all the requirements there, and we have big names in this panel as well. The commercial customers ask for something different. It has to be tested, it has to work all the time, it has to provide support, and the last thing they want is for their developers a paper to read and figure out things, especially in security, let me tell you.
Very good. Jyothi, I know that you have some extensive experience with security, especially at Dover and with Draper before that. Can you provide some examples of security threats and vulnerabilities that exist in the world today that may not be able to be addressed by academic solutions?
Sure. Oh, yeah. Sure. There's been two very big DDoS attacks, which you're not going to see handled or even reproducible in an academic environment. The Dyn attack and then the GitHub attack, which was 1.3 terabytes per second, slamming into and trying to shut down GitHub. Those are some examples. I think that, you know, in general, they tend to, you know, not try to go outside of the lab at school where, you know, they're going to create, you know, I don't want to be, you know, demeaning, but sort of toy problems.
Right. So Chunwa, so Andes has a relatively large footprint in the market, especially in the context of RISC-V and the players that are involved in this ecosystem. So with the origins of security, be they academic or something that borrowed from the commercial world or something that may be even open source, what's Andy's experience with how those are applicable or successful?
From our experience, I think the security solutions actually come from both academic research and the real-world requirements from security problems faced by many different applications. I think they are both important, and I think they complement with each other. And in Andes, for example, we developed our own unique memory protection schemes that to have more security protection levels to fit our customers' requirements and needs. And also we have developed our instruction sequence signature schemes to prevent the instruction code from tampered by attackers. And also other security features that it's a real problem for our customers. For example, our customers, their code, they don't want to be seen by others, third-party developers, or so that's a real problem you have to solve them, and that's not coming from the academic research area.
Very good. So Martin, at Rambus, sorry. How do you typically go about hardening your security offerings? You have some comprehensive security offerings today. What's your approach to making them commercial ready?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we wake up in the morning as a security IP creator and shipper, not one that typically hardens other people's solutions. And in fact, a shout out, a big part of the Rambus core security team is here. Raise your hands. Yes.
Wow.
Lots of folks in the audience. So we typically like to start with a clean sheet of paper from an implementation perspective. And I think we can all agree that there's tremendous math and cryptographic protocol work that is trusted and is not usually where the vulnerability is exploited. It's in the implementation. So we tend to start on our own and use best practices. One interesting thing I even hear in the hallways here at the RISC-V Summit is kind of this idea that everything has to be different just because it's RISC-V. And in fact, we should all use best practices that we've grown to accept. The really cool thing about RISC-V is both on the technical side and the business side, there's some flexibility that we didn't have before in business models and architecture and extensions to do things in a way that is right from the beginning. So I'm avoiding your question because we typically don't consume and harden technology but create it ourselves. And in the ecosystem, we would like with other vendors like us to be the people that are trusted to have done the design correctly from first principles. So it's well vetted, it's well tested, all of the testing standards and expectations. We have a particular interest, certainly a plug for side channel analysis, of course. And to the extent that we're developing leading edge and kind of extreme vetting of leakage for new designs, and we can use that in a test and iterate if the solution is not deterministic when we build it from scratch. So.
Very good. So let's get into some of the more RISC-V related elements of the discussion. So with a lot of the other architectures that are available out in the market today, there are some very significant challenges that we've seen both in the media and then also just by talking to engineers and experience and their experience with the technologies. ARM Trust Zone for a lot of engineers is really difficult to use. It's hard, and in a lot of cases that ends up with them not using it. We've seen some complications lately with Intel SGX. So let's just start off with a big.
You're being very nice. Complicated. Yeah. That's how you call it. Okay.
Let's just start off with a sort of a baseline. Martin, maybe you can help us establish this. What are the various levels of security that we're talking about here if we're dealing with RISC-V that people need to be aware of? And what are they going to be able to implement at a given cost?
And how long do we have for this answer?
Yeah, right.
No, it's a great question. I like to kind of start with the economic analysis of the kind of assets one's trying to protect and the economic trade-offs of how well funded or how well motivated the adversary is to exploit that vulnerability. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you can have an unbelievably secure and hardened design that is unusable. And if it's not actually used in the field, then you haven't actually accomplished this. And in particular, I think you would agree with me.
And you have a larger attack surface.
Exactly.
Yes.
So the typical things, what are the primary threat vectors that you're trying to protect against? How can you minimize the attack surface to make that as easy to control as possible? And then it's really a balance of what are the consequences, either economic or infrastructure disruption or whatever. I mean, the particularly complex and interesting problems in IoT are the fact that a vulnerability in a 25-cent device could open up a coordinated attack on a network that could take down a grid, for example. So I think the case in IoT is one where you have to really think end to end and systemically, not just about the implementation locally at the client or the device, not just in the cloud, but think about the system that you're trying to protect. And then it's always this, there's no one right trade-off. It has to be an economic balance between the risk and the cost in area or power or cost or deployment complexity. So I see the security world as quite gray in that way.
And the threat model is constantly changing.
It's constantly changing.
Because if you look at the number of APIs that end up in these devices these days,
yeah.
Who makes boxes? Here, raise your hand. Who makes device stuff? No one. Okay. So do you put any software in your stuff? Of course. Do you write all the software that you put in your stuff? Of course not. So you have to trust an increasing number of them. The concept of trusting something else is what Trust Zone was really about, but it was really about putting things in one secure place. And then you have to put all of these things in one place. So you have a DRM stack. Well, whoever provides the content want to make sure they can trust it. Otherwise, their very business model is on the internet, okay? If you have a Bluetooth stack, IoT devices, any kind of connectivity, right? Well, that's exposed to attack. You want to keep it in a secure place. But you already taken that secure place. And so where you put it together, and then probably you have a root of trust, and then you have some keys, and then you have the crypto libraries, and you need as many of these security containers as your modern application requires. I think that's the new threat model. It's coming from inside the device. Even once you flash it and ship it, you really don't know what's happening there.
One, I think to characterize it as being resilient to attack as opposed to brittle to attack is also really important, because if you think about layers of protection and how to fail safely or fail gracefully is a really important architectural thing. Again, it starts at the system,
Yes.
not at the crypto.
And it gets more into safety rather than security, and we can have a debate of what's safety. But to keep the lights on an elevator, that there's some problem with the firmware, doesn't have to kill the people inside the elevator, that's the computer, right? So it's okay if there's problems, it doesn't stop at every single floor, and it does what it's supposed to do, but you have to have a safety aspect to things, transportation obviously being the other one. This is the new model where security and safety, I think, goes hand to hand.
So all that being said, you mentioned Trust Zone, Cesare. Does the sort of somewhat greenfield nature of RISC-V provide the opportunity for us to correct some of the deficiencies, or at least reduce costs, make it easier to use, perhaps make RISC-V security more robust than alternatives?
Yes.
I'll ask you first, and then Jyoti, if you want to.
Yes, and we really love to hear also from the other panelists here. X5 is a small and young startups, but we really have very experienced advisors, and you can find their names on our website. And in particular, one of them is coming from ARM and Trustonic and Global Platform. And in fact, I guess he's still the CTO of TELUS today. So it's not just my view, it's what I get from people who have done this for since ever. And so the big problem with Trust Zone is built in the very nature of creating security through separation, but when only you have two buckets, you have only two places. And so you're either secure or not secure. You have an Android device, if it is 4 point whatever, and you have the Snapdragon, which is from Qualcomm. I mean, these are companies that have definitely plenty of resources. There's a guy, if you go to Vegas every August at Black Hat, his mission in life is to break into that Trust Zone implementation every year. And every year he finds a different way into it. It's the complexity associated with that. So being just secure or not secure doesn't fit the model of what today's applications are about and the complexity of them, but also the complexity aspect. And I know, Brandon, you have done some research, actually interviewed actual developers, and I guess in your words, the complexity associated with implementing these security technologies often results in them not being used at all. And how many of you have a Trust Zone component in your products? Except the ARM people in the room. Okay, how many of you actually have a successful Trust Zone implementation? That's something for you to figure out. I think RISC-V offers this opportunity, right? So there's no legacy, and we can take things as they should be and make something make sense. The hooks that are built in are already very good. So Andy's mentioned privilege levels associated with PMP, physical memory protection. In combination with a traditional MMU kind of approach, I think that's a very good start. And there's no really legacy that needs to be really satisfied there. I think also something that I still haven't seen in Silicon, but I hope we'll see very soon, it's the user mode interrupts. So you create separation, and that's great, and you have physical memory protection, MMU, then interrupts comes in. Hundreds of interrupts. How do you handle it? Well, processors these days just go up at the outmost ring, whatever you want to call it, highest level privilege, and process it. And you completely break out the model, because then you can do anything, right? So RISC-V, this is an example, specific example, as a placeholder really in the specs as it is today for user mode exceptions, where the outer ring delegates this to user mode. We actually have implemented, as a bridge, a pure software implementation, which is part of the solution, which is a trap and emulate, which is really the designer of RISC-V also envisioned for anything which is still missing in hardware. They say, you can do it in software. It will go a little bit slower, it will take probably a little bit more power, but you can get it. So that's another example of this thing. So user mode exceptions, PMP, and all of these rings. 4, as we know today. 3 really only implemented. H is still work in progress. Some people in the room might know more about H. H is for hypervisor mode.
Very good. Jyoti, can you give us some perspective on what RISC-V means from a greenfield perspective for security?
Yeah, I think, and I think Trust Zone is a good way to highlight the difference between closed and open. So the ARM touts Trust Zone as all you need. And as most of you probably know, it has 2 compartments, trusted and everything else. It was created because of Android phones, and so you want to run the operating system and the carrier's code in that trusted compartment. And everything else, including apps with malware, runs in the other compartment. And yeah, Trust Zone will absolutely keep those apps from corrupting your memory. Except that what they're not telling you is, is that the trusted compartment has a lot of code running in it. And we all know that complex code has between 15 and 50 bugs per 1,000 lines of source code. And so the bad guys are very good, and they'll find it. They'll find the bugs. They'll hack the trusted compartment. What's going on in the RISC-V community is it's open, and people are really looking for what are the other innovative types of security. And yeah, we do need compartmentalization, and we do need encryption, which we call communication security. But all of those are kept secure by having what we're calling computing security, which is 80% of network-based attacks have a buffer overflow part of the attack that's critical for it to work. You have to get at the processor to be able to stop the buffer overflow attacks. And if you do, then you're going to protect the compartments in the compartmentalization. You're going to protect the endpoint that's trying to send something out encrypted from having the hacker get in and bypass encryption. So what I see is two things that I want to highlight about the openness of the RISC-V community. One is that, the experimentation, the innovation, the sort of, the hug you get is, yeah, let's all try to figure this out. But the other is, many of you may remember that it used to be that encryption algorithms were proprietary and close held. And people kept figuring out flaws in them and ways to work around them. And then we finally said, you know what, that's not working. Let's have the algorithms open, the keys private, and AES encryption has still not been cracked. And the same thing is going to be true in this community. More eyes and more hands are going to make RISC-V be a much more secure environment.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead for time's sake. But let's get to the crux of the conversation then, because one of the great things about RISC-V is that it's an open architecture and you're able to modify it. You're able to play around with some of the extensions. But from a security perspective, this can create issues. There's not going to be any way to be able to standardize security really across all these various implementations of RISC-V. So we'll start with you, Chuanhua. Andes develops 32 and 64-bit processors. So what is your approach to maintaining a security model across these different architectures, and then how do you plan to integrate that on RISC-V?
Actually, the security requirements, actually from different customers are different, and they want different things. So, for example, some of them they want a hierarchical approach for protection. So actually, the privilege modes can satisfy their needs. But for some customers, they just want a complete separation between different modes. So in that regard, we need a different approach. And also, another thing is the security solution actually involves many different building aspects, such as, or different layers, such as you need a secure debugging and secure interrupt. And also, you need to have countermeasures for side channel analysis attacks or some measure for tampering resistance. And these are all different requirements, and some of them are necessary, some of them are an extra protections. And I think what Josie said, that the openness of the RISC-V actually is a good thing for everyone to look at the different security construct to see if they actually can satisfy different security requirements. And But sometimes when we, actually there are some customers, they still want to generate their own security algorithm also. And they think that this can actually, if the attacker doesn't know their algorithm, they can hide from attackers.
That's the security through obscurity that never existed. And if anyone who runs any piece of Microsoft code or Adobe code, and all of this is closed source, is proprietary, and every week we get a patch because it's broken, right? So that's what the Tuesday patch is, right? Now, open source is not necessarily better.
Mm-hmm.
OpenSSL gets broken very often, but at least it gets fixed immediately.
You say attackers can always reverse engineer what kind of algorithm.
So obscurity through obscurity never works. Sometime, somewhere, someone will figure it out. And you remember the story of the DVDs encryption? That's a famous one, right? So some DVDs content was encrypted, probably still is. I don't know if people care about DVDs these days, but movies. And the algorithm was totally proprietary. Some guy figured it out and actually printed T-shirts with the algorithm. And so you can put people in jail for printing T-shirts. And so that's where the end of that encryption really was.
Okay, but I think the openness and the extension of the RISC-V actually can let people to experiment on different security approaches.
Now, what happens in the microarchitecture, that's something that I leave to you to think about, because that's not specified by the ISA. That's an interesting gray area that might be worth in the next panel.
Yeah, you can, for example, you can design special instructions that do a very special thing.
There are companies that embed controllers into controllers, and we read this in the news, and you know who I'm talking about, right? And people don't know why those controllers are there, but they're there.
Well, how about you, Martin? Rambus has root of trust technology. What do you think about security coming up across RISC-V from that perspective?
Yeah, I think there's no free lunch in architecture, and I think if we think about people trying to maintain application-level legacy compatibility in software stacks at the very highest performance levels, it's extremely difficult as the complexity exponentially rises to ensure that every available exploit is attended to. It's humanly impossible to control that environment sufficiently for some of the attacks during the last year that became very prevalent and well known. However, you made a comment earlier, and I think RISC-V has an enormous hardware and software stack opportunity to protect the keys. So one of the things that we've done is started from a clean sheet of paper and designed in particular a processor that was particularly good at side channel resistance and resistance to other attacks that can take on a task of protecting what's increasingly important, which is key material, and siloing and ensuring that the combination of trying to optimize high performance and optimizing storage and distribution of keys are not commingled in the event that that's important to your system architecture. So I don't see RISC-V, the question was a bit leading in that, do we have to create different architectures to distribute keys, or the keys have to be different? The keys are keys. The design flexibility that RISC-V offers is particularly advantageous if implemented in the right way with simplicity by security experts to handle keys, which is a very hard problem to attack in a multi-core, very, very big application stack. It's a management complexity and design freedom opportunity in RISC-V.
All right, Cesare, how about interoperability? Hex5's working, up in software, so.
That's a skeleton in the closet, right? So it is obvious, I think, to everyone who actually speaks with real customers, the market, that RISC-V is not going to happen in a vacuum. It's going to start as the nicest and coolest and most customizable thing that you do in addition to something else. We know what something else is because the whole ecosystem it's ARM. And so definitely there is an heterogeneous problem that needs to be solved. Now the interesting thing is that RISC-V is completely open, but unless it's standardized, will be completely fragmented on that end. On the other hand, you have one vendor that enforces everything. despite what some of them believes. And that this platform kind of approach. So I think what you will see, and you will see it, you will think about me, that security can only be fixed at the platform level. There's no escape from that. ISA is a contract in between what the core does and what software tells it to do. All the bus masters, all DMA activity, all intercore across heterogeneous environments that will happen, how is all of that secure? And so I had this conversation many times with key people, and I would say, that's not the job of the ISA. Fine. Whose job is that? Because in the end, in an ARM world, there is some entity that controls the whole thing and can mandate some direction. I haven't seen this happening yet. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. But I've seen great things happening just in a few months around other things. So perhaps this is what we'll see. Next panel, we will discuss what is being done there. But as of now, anything that happens outside the core is up to the implementation.
Very good. Chonwa, I'm going to go back to you. So we've had hardware and software perspectives on security. What's the Andy's perspective? You touch a little bit of both. You know, the more hardware you add, the more development tools that are needed. You know, tool chains. You know, the more software you add, the more software obviously you add. So what's your perspective to the best way of maintaining a manageable, cost-effective security architecture from Andy's?
So I think first we need to understand the security problems, and then especially in the design phase, you know, the security issues needs to be involved in every phase of the design, and then also you need to educate the designers about these security problems, and most of these problems are difficult to understand first. And then also I think we need some security test suite or good methods to expose the weakness of the design somehow, for people to realize that actually your design has weakness, so they can properly fix that problems. Yeah. So, but currently, I think the openness of RISC-V probably, you know, it's best for people to eventually find those security use cases problems, and then come up with some good test suites for security test.
Very good. Martin, do you want to add on that? What do you think of process verification?
Several people have mentioned it so far. I think on the education and awareness piece, security and the opportunities in RISC-V from an ISA up perspective are getting a lot of airplay. So that feels good. That in some ways may be the most tractable problem. The really hard problems, as you mentioned earlier, is up in software. So I think innovation-wise, we've got to agree in certain markets over time on some standard or at least accepted open APIs. And I think a lot of innovation is ahead of us still in open source software testing. Take an OTA case where a platform is continuously tested and patches and upgrades are available openly for lots of eyes to see. If we don't open it up and continuously test and evolve, we won't address where most of the vulnerabilities will end up being, which is in the millions of lines of code running on various hardware platforms. I think I'm pleased and will be a big part of helping stabilize the hardware and the keys at the device level. I think there's still lots of room for innovation and collaboration and testing in real use cases, particularly in a real-time OTA kind of environment, because it's not going to be static. The security properties will inherently be dynamic and need to be adjusted to over time. So.
Very good. Jyothi, how do you think that the ecosystem needs to respond in the inevitable event that there's a vulnerability that's discovered within RISC-V? What does the ecosystem need to do? What are the steps that need to be taken, preventative or reactionary?
Well, certainly it's not go dark, stay dark, and don't tell anybody.
Right.
That's pretty much proven to fail. So I think everybody needs to, and it's more than just in RISC-V itself. It's sort of in the broader set of things that are around RISC-V, that come clean about it, analyze it, come clean about what it is. It's a community. Try to marshal any help you can get to figure out how to fix it, how to deal with the ramifications of the breach. I hope we don't ever see something as big as the Equifax breach or any of these things. Hopefully by then we will have learned something from all of these. But the problem that we do have with, and I'm kind of associating RISC-V with IoT because I think it's a huge opportunity for RISC-V, is, as Martin said, you can have a 25-cent sensor that gets hacked and might enable somebody to take down the electric grid. And so it's going to be absolutely essential that we are sort of self-policing the entire environment.
That being said, I want to thank all of our panelists really quickly. Cesare GARLATI of HEX5, Martin of Rambus, Chunwa of Andes, and Jyoti here of Dover Microsystems. Sort of wrapping up
We
here.
have a couple of minutes left for Q&A.
Yep.
So in the other big players like ARM and Intel and so forth, when they come up with a clever security idea, they add a few more instructions, and then they, by virtue of their large size, make sure that ends up in the back ends of compilers and so forth. And it doesn't seem that model is going to would work great with RISC-V, and which is, I think, a good thing. How do you think then that what's the analog in an open source ISA where there's, on the one hand, everybody can create their own RISC-V variants, which have their own custom instructions, but that also is probably not a good idea. So I was wondering how you think RISC-V might play with this as compared to what's been happening in the industry.
Well, he wasn't a plant, I promise.
I saw the T-shirt though.
Yeah, I know, but he wasn't.
Does he know the guy?
But I actually was gonna make the point earlier that the instinct of the big vendors has been to create the thing they think is the solution in hardware, and you're seeing the pain that Intel is justifiably going through with SGX. It's got flaws, and they're going to have to redesign the chip multiple times probably. What we're trying is a hybrid solution that says, okay, in our case there has to be a little piece of hardware because you can't come over the network and rewire the hardware, but then beyond that, make it as flexible as you can, and I think the same thing applies across a much broader set of things than just the kind of security that we're doing, and it seems like hybrid solutions work really well.
So I agree with the hybrid. I think I'm mic'd up. Specifically to the ISA question, though, I'll unabashedly plug something that's pretty cool about the RISC-V Foundation. I'll plug Helena back here from Rambus, who's actually chairing one of the first standing working groups So I think getting very large academic and industrial collaboration, openly looking at extensions that make cryptographic operations efficient, secure by design, and they're opened and streamed into the ISA for everybody to use is a fantastic model. I mean, it's really a very different way to attack this problem. It doesn't solve all of the implementation issues, certainly doesn't attack the risk that microarchitectural features or software bugs have, but your question about Intel enclosed and and looking at the problem differently. I think this is a really different way to look at particularly how to extend the ISA to be particularly relevant to security. So I think I encourage collaboration.
I'd like to add
and running
a
work.
bit of color based on my experience working in one of these security groups.
Yep.
We call it the trust execution environment. Same people doing security as best we can. And so this came up all over again, and in the end, we didn't really want to add instructions. That's probably the best thing to do. So again, complexity is the enemy of security. So keep it simple,
Agreed.
reduce the attack surface, because the moment you add an instruction, you need to add all the test case for what's going to happen, the possible states and side channel. So if you really need one, but as of now, it seems like the problem is moving outside the core, the way I see it. It's more about how you interconnect different cores, heterogeneous environments, bus masters, DMA. That's not something you solve with an instruction. Now,
I agree.
as far as extensions, let's be careful, because that's what fragmentation in the end is going to be. And then something breaks and gets on the Wall Street Journal, and well, that's not RISC-V. It's that guy implementation. The RISC-V brand is going to be affected anyway. I'm pretty sure there are big names that are just waiting for this to happen out there. And then it's a proper implementation or not. So let's keep it simple. So it's more likely that it's going to be a good implementation. As of now, as far as the security group I work with, it's really been about bits inside the instructions that already exist, and that's the PMP, what you can do or not. But it's not like adding big things, which I think is a good thing.
Where do people find out more information on that, Cesare, on the security group?
Yes, thank you. Everyone is welcome to participate to any group within RISC-V as an individual contributor. So a great way, and you don't have to pay for that. A great way to start is just to go to the foundation website, which I think is risc5.org. I might be wrong because it's in my bookmarks, but thank you. And that's where you actually get to see things. Now, some of this content, I think it's password protected. So I think the process is to ask for a formal membership. I started as an individual contributor before starting the company. I just sent an email and they say, okay, join the bandwagon and have fun.
Very
And
good.
please do it.
Yeah, I had a question. How would the panel recommend an open source collaborative group proceed in the presence of an extremely large industry pool of security patents?
Patents?
Rambus?
Rambus? Patents? Rambus? Who would know something about
No,
it?
I'm not. All kidding aside, I'm not sure I understand the gist of the question. If you could.
It's a bit of a patent minefield.
The microphone is
patent
coming
mine.
back.
Patents. Yeah.
Is it?
Patent mine. Just concern. I mean, I'm not pointing at any one particular company. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that have many patents that are
Yeah.
potentially, they may be quiet and
That's a
sitting
fair
and wait
question.
on them in the future, sitting on them now, but in the future might pounce when things look attractive.
Well, one thing is the foundation is actually can be a vehicle for pooling of patents. And so, I've been involved in patent wars in the past, and as long as you have a pretty strong defensive set of patents, somebody coming after you, doesn't matter how big they are, if you're able to say, well, okay, you've got that one and I've got this one, and you have a much better chance of defending yourself if everybody pools their patents against that kind of threat.
And I would like to offer just a slightly different perspective. Obviously, nothing about the legal aspects of patents, but just consider how many large nation states are really buying into the RISC-V proposition. I mean, China is quite public, India quite public. When you have a nation state, on the other side, I don't know what would be the effort eventually to go through kind of patent war. You see what I'm saying? You don't have a commercial entity against you. You have an all nation state with vested interest there. So I think it's a matter of critical mass. If it gets there, then you can't really stop it.
we're out of time, unfortunately, but there is a networking break after this, so if you do have questions and you'd like to address the panelists, feel free to come up and speak with them individually. But I'd like to thank them for the time this afternoon. I'd like to thank you for attending.